Why? What decreased in that product?
Doesn't take as much to make it anymore.
It doesn't take as much touch labor to make it, because labor equals the value of your money. Now, this is very important. What do we call it when a culture moves to a market economic system based in money?
Capitalism.
Capitalism. Thank you very much. Capitalism. Now, what I want you to note, this is very important. We can prove, okay, we know, existentially, we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that human beings are interested in property, right, from the very beginning. And they form governments to protect property. I can prove this. There is no other purpose that I can prove for government other than to protect private property.
How can you prove that?
I just did. Because why else would I form a government in historical terms? Do you see that? Because we acknowledge the fact that the most important thing, the only difference between a primitive culture without a government and a primitive culture with a government is the difference between might makes right and the ability to protect property communally as a group. So the reason I formed that communal group was to do what? To protect private property. I didn't do it to beat my neighbors over here, right? I mean, I could, that is a thing, but if I do that, what would it mean if I am trying to form a government to raid my neighbors?
You want their property.
I want their property. Do you see this? We just did a recursive argument, which is a beautiful recursive argument. We just proved from another way that the reason for forming a government is to do what? To protect private property. To take, well, in this case, to take it. Same thing, right? Protecting taking? Either way, I'm claiming it because I'm bigger than you, right? That's the way it works. So I can prove that the purpose of government is to protect private property. Of course, and remember, we did put an interesting caveat on that. Well, not caveat. Part of the definition of private property includes your life. As a matter of fact, you guys familiar with the words? Life, liberty, and by the way, what did they originally want to, according to the Federalist Papers, what did they originally want to put in there for the third one? Private property. Why did they not? Anybody read the Federalist Papers? The reason they put in pursuit of happiness because they wanted to ensure the right to use your property. Pursuit of happiness means the ability to use your property. This is an interesting point. The Founding Fathers knew this. This is stuff. Look, guys, the Founding Fathers were enveloped in this. All the stuff that we've been talking about in this class from the beginning to end, except for the really modern science stuff we brought in, this is the Founders stuff. The Founders knew all this. They knew all about this stuff. This isn't like new. This is old stuff. What I want you to see, though, is government follows because of private property. That's provable. The law follows because of government. That's provable. That's the reason you get law. Economics comes out of that legal thing between property and government. And what is the end of the markets that are formed? Capitalism. A market based in money. The point I want to make here...
Make the difference between socialism, market based upon...
Well, I'll get there. We'll get there. You're skipping ahead. Don't skip ahead yet, because we'll get there. The point is this. I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the natural state, the natural provable state of human endeavor, goes directly economically to what?
Greed.
No, to capitalism. Capitalism is a natural state. Greed is a natural state of man. That's okay. I don't have any problem with
I
that.
want to have property. That's greed. That's hoarding.
Well,
We love to hoard.
we're going to see what God thinks about property in a second. We'll talk about it in the Old Testament construct. But the big deal is what you need to know. Do I have to implement capitalism as a law on people?
Don't have to.
No.
Why?
It's in our DNA.
It's natural. This is the natural state once you invent money. Before money, you have barter. You have trade. Some of you guys probably are still doing trade and barter, all right? It's the way it works sometimes, right?
The IRS tracks that too, by the way.
Well, I hope not too closely, but that's another problem. In any case,
No, seriously, they do track trading of labor,
There's-
and then they try to charge you for it.
so,
That's
So-
not a joke, that's a statement of fact.
well,
It's sad too.
anyway, they're looking at everything. So, the important point to note is we can evaluate then everything we're talking about, okay? If we and I'm talking about what we can prove. We'll talk about in a second things we can't prove, okay? Or that we can prove within a different construct. But within the historical construct, this is what we have. We have that the purpose of government is to protect private property. That's the only provable purpose. Therefore, for example, if I'm saying that taxation by the government, what is the purpose of taxation by the government?
Protect property.
Safety, protection.
To protect your private property. And by the way, what's really important to note this is what are the 5 things that the U.S. government can, and I'll talk about this next week, so maybe I shouldn't bring it up, but I'll just mention it. The 5 things the government is able to spend money on according to the Constitution: post office, post roads, Army, Navy,
Defense.
Army,
Well,
Navy,
that's Army Navy.
and D.C. Under the Constitution, there's 5 things they can spend money on. Our founding fathers knew very well that the point of the government was to protect private property.
Property owners could vote.
Did he say DC?
Only property owners could vote in the original Constitution. You guys see a connection there?
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, you know, whether you agree with or disagree with the way, for example, the implementation of the Constitution is neither here nor there. The most important thing to recognize is that using the provable purpose of government, the only thing government is allowed to do provably, of course, according to proof, historically, is to protect private property. And we see that, right? Because the main point of governments, for example, is defense. We have firemen, we have policemen. Firemen keep your property from burning up. Policemen are supposed to protect your rights and life. And by the way, let me point this out. Well, now I'll wait till next week because that'll be the point. So, how do we get to other economic systems? Someone mentioned one. Someone mentioned socialism. There are actually 3 other major economic systems. How do I get to them? If capitalism is the natural state of human endeavor, after money's invented, then how do I get to those other isms?
Your laws change?
Some means of enforcement.
Well, it's not cultural. You have to do it. Okay, look at our thing. How can I put another economic system in place? There's only one way. How do I do it?
Revolution.
Will change your value of the or something more than property, or no?
I change my law. Okay, so let's see. Let's look at the other ones. Can anybody tell me there are 3 other
Fascism.
major economic systems? In fact, I may have put them on the chart, so that's not fair, right?
here.
Fascism,
Capital,
Communism and socialism.
Fascism,
Communism.
socialism, and communism.
Communism.
Now, nobody believes in socialism or communism anymore. I don't think anybody believes in fascism anymore. You know, we throw out these terms like water, right? There is no definition for fascism. Go look it up on Wiki. I don't like Wikipedia very much at all, but it's a good place to start. You want to go look up on Wikipedia. Fascism is not a form of government. These are not forms of government, guys. These are economic systems. I cannot define fascism as a governmental system. I can define it as an economic system. Fascism is a means of controlling government and property through regulation. That's what the Nazis did. That's what the Italian fascists did. I wasn't going to say it, but you can say it all you want.
America does it.
The way the fascism is defined economically as a means of control of private property through regulation. So, for example, the Germans did not own outright the companies in World War II. Albert Speer was on the boards of every company, and he controlled them through their boards. They also controlled them through regulation. but the control of government, or the control by government of businesses or private property through regulation. By the way, how do you keep the meter readers off your property? The government meter readers. You can't. By law, after about 1934, before 1934 you could shoot them. Now you can't, because the law gives them an easement. The government has an absolute easement on your property because they provide you services. So you cannot protect your property from the government, the meter readers. And by the way, the government can come on your property to inspect your property at any time. It's amazing to me the regulations we have here. I use this as a great example. They made me move my hot tub 3 feet from my house before they would give me a permit for it. Now why would that be? Why would the government care how close my hot tub was to my house? They care about whether I sell lemonade. You know, maybe they're going to care whether I serve you lemonade. You know, pretty soon that's the thing, right? Protects the public.
Covers a lot.
It is insane, but that's okay. Remember, the purpose of government that I can prove is to protect private property. Is coming on my property or telling me what I can do or not do with my property? How about this? How about a property tax? You pay the government a levy to use your own property, which means that, what does that imply?
They will protect it.
That you do not own the property. It is owned by the government and not by you. Property tax to me is probably the most evil tax there is because of that. But that's another issue. We'll talk about that. What is socialism? Socialism is an economic system.
Government owns
Order of
everything.
labor.
This is where the government owns businesses. So government owns the private property. So for example, when the government owns GM, that is socialism. When the government owns, oh my goodness, the government owns our water company here. That's called socialism. When the government owns something, it's socialism. The government owns all the schools, public schools. That's socialism. You have to put the proper words or names or titles to it. Socialism only exists, fascism only exists in the environment of law. Socialism only exists in the environment of law. What's communism? The state owns everything. Owns all private property, makes claim to all private property, owns what they call the means of production, which means all labor. Which also means that they own all the money. Remember, money is labor, labor is money. There's no differentiation. Because ultimately, all of these systems are overlaid on what? Capitalism. Capitalism exists whether you want it to or not. The Soviet Union tried for 1,000 years, well, 70 years, however long it existed, to try to get rid of capitalism, right? They made it illegal to do capitalism. What did they have going on in their cities every day?
Black market.
Black market, and guess what they weren't using?
Money.
They weren't using dollars or rubles. They were using barter. You know, the value of the Soviet money. What was the value of the Soviet and East German currency? Nothing. It was worth nothing. The value, because why? What was the labor? Who owned all the labor? The government owned all the labor. If the government owns all the labor, what's your money worth? Nothing. Very little. So, you know, what you've got to recognize is I can prove the purpose of government. I can prove that the economic system that you're going to end up with, if you have no regulations, if everything's cool, you're going to end up with capitalism. Whether you like it or not, that's what you're going to end up with, because that's the natural state of human affairs. Okay? Period. You have to enact laws to put these. You have to have regulations like crazy. You have to control government. Government has to control businesses to get fascism. Government has to own businesses to get socialism, and government has to own everything to get communism. If you ever wondered what those governments were, it's these. And by the way, let me ask you a very important question. Tammy said I should bring this up. I probably mentioned it in later sessions, but that's okay. Are Nazis left-wing or right-wing? Are Nazis left-wing or right-wing? We're going to take a vote? What does Nazi stand for? National Socialist Party. Okay. are, what is, okay, generally right wing are what? Encouraging
Capitalism.
capitalism. Capitalism. Now, if I have National Socialist Party in my title, does that sound like a capitalist venture?
It could be a misnomer.
Could be a misnomer?
Could be.
Could be. Could
I mean, you
be.
call it a tail and it's a leg, it doesn't matter, it's still a tail.
Well, you know, were Hitler's policies one where the state controls or the individual? Because right wing is supposed to be individual, right? Where left wing is the state. You know, it's astounding to me. Nazis are liberal. They're left wing. Well, liberal is not the right. I can't use that word because liberal, remember, classical liberals are conservatives today, but leftists, okay? The important point is this. You know, when we look at things within a definitive understanding, okay, provable points. For example, when you begin to deconstruct what does a group stand for, what do they do? Nazis, for example.
Not what they say, what they do.
Well, even well, half the time what they say is what they do, which really bothers me, but that's okay, you know. But, okay, you know, the point that I'm trying to make here is, you know, we have culturally come to the opinion. Now, why culturally have we come to an opinion that Nazis are right-wing?
Because the people making the opinion, it's in their interest to say so.
Well, who originally called them right-wing? Do you know?
Probably Roosevelt.
No, the Russians did. The USSR did because why?
They were right at the left.
Well, because the left, because at the time, the big fight in the world was between communist ideology and fascist ideology. Fascism is a means of government control of resources, okay? And at the time, there was a huge fight. The communists said that they need to own everything. The fascists basically said, well, we want to let capitalism work a little bit, but we still think the government should control everything too. And so the big fight was ideological. Remember I told you this. Ideology is what drives cultural change and cultural ideas. And so the Soviet Union wanted to paint the Nazis as right-wing to set them apart from their leftist ideology. Because they wanted you to be clear that when you're joining with us, the Communist Party, you are joining the leftists. When you join with the Fascist Party, you're joining with those evil right-wing whoever. But there is no difference between the two. Yes, ma'am.
Well, has China gone from communism to fascism?
No, ma'am. China is a controlled communist economy. It's probably going to fail within 10 years, and the fail will be enormous. You see all these things about how their growth is, you know, they just said their growth went down to 9%. All right. What did the Soviet Union report their growth to be for 70 years until they failed?
What did Madoff state?
What's his name? Who was the last head of the Soviet Union?
Not Khrushchev.
The guy with the funny...
Gorbachev.
Gorbachev. No, not Gorbachev. The guy with the funny mark on his head. That was Gorbachev. Okay, Gorbachev. Anyways, he said this. This is what he told the Duma, the last year of the Soviet existence. The Duma is the Congress in the Soviet Union. He told them, we have been reporting 20% growth rate for 70 years. He said the actual growth rate has been negative for 70 years because controlled economies always have a negative growth rate. Why does a communist culture, what is it about a communist society that allows them to give you numbers that show positive growth?
No check.
There's no check and balance.
Right.
For example, you know, isn't it amazing they keep revising the figures for unemployment? The unemployment rate was half of what it was, or, you know, the employment rate was half of what it was last month. The reason is because our government comes out with a bunch of hooey too, but then we have a freedom still in this country. We check the government's figures, and every time the government comes out, we find out they're lying to us. Have you noticed this? I would love for once for them not to lie. Every year, or every month, every quarter, they're decreasing the rate of the growth in the previous quarter because it went out as a headline that we had 3% growth. And by the way, well, I think I'll get this. Why do we have to have 3% growth?
Beat inflation.
Yeah,
Because
I
we'll
mean,
be
at least
negative.
with inflation.
We inflate our money by 3% per year. If our growth rate is not above 3%, then you have no growth.
Then we can pay off our debt
So
with
if,
inflated money.
and guess what? We have had no growth above 3% for about 3 years, which means we are in a depression. But that's another thing. We'll talk about it next week. That's all right. The thing is that people like to lie. Governments like to lie to you, and especially governments that are based in fascism, socialism, and communism. And by the way, if you were to categorize our government, which one would you place it? Which category would you place it in today?
We have an element of each.
Between fascism and socialism.
Yeah.
We control lemonade shops. Why do you think I mentioned it to you in the beginning? I want you to have an aha moment. We regulate children's lemonade shops. That is called fascism. You can't get away from this. My goodness gracious. In this state, we tell you where you can smoke.
Regulation and owning it, isn't there?
What's that?
Isn't there a difference between regulating it and owning it?
There is.
Yes,
But is there a difference in true implementation?
but the electrical company is fascist, because we can control it, we don't own it, by government. The roads we own.
All I'm doing, and I'm not trying to put a pejorative on anything, okay? I'm not trying to label anything. I mean, people love to label stuff. They'll claim they don't like a Nazi or fascist or whatever. You know, today communism, nobody cares about it. Communism killed 100 million people, but that's okay. We don't worry about it. We don't teach it in our schools, but it's a bad thing, you know? But the point you need to know, the very most important point you need to know is this. These are not pejoratives. These are terms used for economic systems. And if you don't understand this, you're going to have a serious problem. So what you have to do is, in truth, as we have done, we have labeled and defined things. Now you can define truly what is fascism, socialism, and communism. And you know what? I don't like any of it. But that's my personal opinion. That's ethics. Do you see this? My ethical opinion, my opinion ethically is I don't like either of this. And I'm going to skip quick. I got all kinds of really good stuff in here, but I want to really quickly go to something. Old Testament, New Testament. Let's talk about Old Testament. Because what does God think about property? In Exodus, God says, Exodus 20:15, he says, you shall not steal.
Leave people property.
We'll go-
What is it talking about? Property. You shall not take my property. You know what? That's one of the Big Ten. Well, how important could private property be to God? So, if the government takes taxes for other than the purpose of protecting private property, what have they just done? I didn't make that conclusion, you did. I just point that out. Because the purpose I can prove for government is to protect private property. But if the government is not protecting private property with those tax dollars, they have taken a gun, literally. Because if you don't pay your taxes, what happens to you? Remember the Mar Matrix?
Unless you're the treasurer secretary, you would go to jail.
Oh yeah, unless you're a tax chief
These
Geithner.
people have been voted in to represent us. Now, there's something there. We've allowed it by allowing these people in office. It's not like they've dictated and come in and pushed us over with their might-right idea. Somehow we've allowed this to take place over time by voting them in, which is so...
Right, except even if you leave your door unlocked, that doesn't give someone else the right to come in and take your stuff.
True.
That's the one argument I have against this voting. I vote, but I hear people say, well, if you don't vote, you can't complain. I said, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
If you leave your door unlocked, does that mean you can't complain when someone steals all your stuff?
Right.
Well, what we'll do is next week we'll kind of dive into this a little bit, because next week we're going to talk about we're going to apply, this private property to finances, capitalism, social welfare, taxes, and gambling. So we're actually going to delve into these details a little bit and see how they plan out, because, the point is this. Remember, we just want in this class to define those things we can prove. And then what you do is you go home and you cogitate on them. And, I'm not trying to give you my opinions on these things at all. I mean, when I do, I say this is ethical. I try to identify my opinions. I'm not trying to give you opinions. I'm trying to show you what we can prove, how things became what they are, and then the definitions for each part. Once you understand this, the definitions, remember what I said at the very beginning? The arguments flow automatically from it. Whether you want to make an ethical decision on it, whether, for example, a congressman or senator wants to make an ethical decision if he knows this. And I would say that they probably don't have a clue. They're not educated in some of this stuff. This is basic stuff our founders knew. But the day we are in a miserable state of education about a lot of these issues, and that's what irritates me. 90% of people in this country can't define fascism, socialism, and communism. They have no idea. These guys killed 100 million people and have no idea what it means. These guys have wrecked numerous economies, and nobody knows what it means. And these guys fought a couple of world wars, and we don't even came to find them. One of the reasons they don't want to define them is because fascism is really liberalism, or leftist. So, you know, there's a reason why culturally we have not wanted to define fascism. There's a reason culturally why we don't want to delve into communism. Yes, sir.
To bring up a couple of points, Germany and Japan, being imperialistic states, they wanted land. The key is they wanted land. Germany is a small country without land, you know. And the Japanese jumped right on. Germany was already at war. Japanese saw imperialistic, and I'll never forget, they talked about the Germans are going to hit us on the East Coast, and the Russians, the Japanese, and you know, they were always worried about being invaded by these two countries.
That's right.
And the thing also, the other thing I've got to bring up to you, because you bring it up, that hot tub of yours.
Yeah.
And the fact but let me ask you this. Right now, you know the United States of America has grown. I mean, really grown in population. Thank God, because we keep losing more in war.
Right.
But without regulations, right now the drought, if you look at Augusta, Kansas, they don't have any water. Without regulations by the city.
All right.
No, my floor right now, Lionel.
Yeah, that's all right.
Without some regulations and inspections when you buy a home, isn't it nice to know an electrical inspector who was certified by having to pass a board?
Nope. Let me put it to you this way. How about this? How about this? Who controls the water in Augusta? Is it a market-based private industry?
No.
No. Wait a second. The government's supposed to solve all these problems. Why would we have a thing? I'm not disagreeing. I'm not going to argue, you know, on the benefits of regulation per se. I'm just going to point out that what you have to do is you have to go back and you say, what is the cause? Did you know this? You can never have shortages under capitalism. Why can you not have shortages in a market economy? We'll talk about this next week more, but why can you not? Why don't you think about that? And next week we'll talk about it. Why is it impossible to have shortages in a market?
Someone will solve the problem.
Well, that's part of it.
Competition is constantly supply-demand.
But cogitate, and we'll talk about it next week, because this is
The bottom line
important.
is, if you don't have water, this has been an issue for, you say control. If your lake is dry, there is no water in your lake.
In the Soviet Union, the people were starving to death for 70 years. Why?
Government control.
The government controlled the food.
Read the Black
Okay?
Book of Communism.
Father God, we thank you so much for your word. We pray that you just continue to look after us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.
When they opened this.
We wanted highways, and Senator Curry wrote